Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the South Derbyshire series, a district of Derbyshire which stretches from Leicestershire to Staffordshire, containing 50 civil parishes. Here's one of them for you. Welcome back to South Derbyshire, everybody. Now, the other day, when it absolutely tipped it down and we were recording Hatton and Church Broughton, I was meant to do this one as well. Thankfully, the weather has cleared up a bit now, a couple of days later, and it's not raining, thankfully. Still a bit wet underfoot though. Anyway, this is the one that I was supposed to do with those other two, or should I say one of the two villages in this one, which I was supposed to do with the other two. This is Foston. A tiny little place, really small, only a handful of properties along this one road, and there's a river that runs sort of there, sort of where my car is there. And even this house is called Foston Mews, look, you see. And Foston forms part of the parish of Foston and Scropton. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Welcome to the parish of Foston and Scropton, another one located on the northern bank of the River Dove in the Dove Valley. It includes the village of Scropton and the hamlet of Foston. Much like Hatton, the Domesday book records that Henry de Ferrers held a manor here. From the 14th until the 17th century, it was held by the Agard family. Although both Foston and Scropton are in modern-day Derbyshire, that wasn't always the case. Foston was an ancient township on the Derbyshire-Staffordshire county border. That was until 1890, when it was severed from Staffordshire and became part of Derbyshire. Foston may be smaller than Scropton, but you could argue that it has much more of interest. For one, it has Foston Hall, which is now one of the many prisons in this part of the Midlands, and one which is rather unique in terms of who you'll find in it. Then of course, there's Dove Valley Park, which is where RAF Church Broughton once was. When we get to Scropton, we'll see some of the local RAF history in its cemetery. Scropton also has the parish church, a lovely 19th century signal box on the local railway line, and a massive food factory which handles poultry. It's a very varied one, this, so let's get walking and see what else we can find. We start with a short walk through Foston, which has always been the smaller of these two settlements. Nonetheless, what Foston has is quite unusual. Foston village is largely residential, but you may recall that the former RAF Church Broughton is mostly within Foston and Scropton's boundaries. That means a few major companies are based here, including JCB Power Systems and a large dairy owned by Dairy Crest Limited. There may of course be smaller ones in the actual village itself. You can get a bus here. That would be the 401 service, which we mentioned back in Hatton. Next to the bus stop we find a bench, which was placed here to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II in 2012. And flowing through Foston is this stretch of water, which is not a river, rather it's Foston Brook, and we'll meet this again in Scropton. So I've got Nikki joining me for this next bit. I'm sorry I'm having to shout here because what we're doing is we're crossing the A50 onto the other side of the road, because that's where we're going to find another prison, HMP Foston Hall. And I'm bringing Nikki with me because crime is something that Nikki's quite interested in, isn't it? Well, this is a very interesting prison because it's a female-only prison. We'll talk a bit more about it when we get over this bridge and out of this traffic noise. The modern A50, as we learned in the Hatton episode, was built in 1995 as a bypass. When it was built, it split Foston into two pieces. On its southern side, Uttoxeter Road continues, and on it is Foston Hall. This is now a prison, but it hasn't always been a prison. In fact, it originated as a manor house in the 17th century, which was destroyed by fire in 1836. The Foston Hall you see today, though, is largely a Jacobean house designed by Thomas Chambers Hine and built in 1863. In 1891, Foston Hall was the property and sometimes residence of Admiral Sir Arthur Cumming, who was noted for his anti-slavery operations in the Royal Navy. The prison service acquired the hall and its grounds in 1953. It closed temporarily in 1996, but was reopened in 1997 after a refurbishment. So according to Nikki, part of this is being demolished.
Yeah, a couple of wings, there's a planning notice. A couple of wings are being demolished. Whether or not they're being replaced is another matter.
Who knows? So there's some notable inmates in here, isn't there, Nikki?
Well, there were two who were very well known female in British crime. One of which is Maxine Carr, who was involved with Ian Huntley and the happenings down in Soham. And the other one being Karen Matthews. Currently there is one notable inmate that, you know, is more sort of well known, and that is somebody called Louise Porton. And if you Google her name, you'll certainly see what she did, but trust me, it doesn't make for pleasant reading.
As interesting as Foston is, today's main walk is around the much bigger Scropton, and we start at the Church of St Paul. This church contains late 15th and early 16th century monuments. It was rebuilt in 1855 and 56 under the direction of the Gothic Revival architect Benjamin Ferry. In the porch is a board telling us that this is a Grade 2 listed building, and it's at least the third that stood on this site. Loving the owls, by the way. Nikki then spotted the grave of John Broadhurst, who was a politician. He lived at the original Foston Hall, and it's even mentioned on his gravestone. St Paul's has a separate cemetery, which is a short way down Main Street. This contains some more interesting graves, including some Commonwealth ones. We didn't know it until we researched Church Broughton, but some of these graves are those of an aircrew whose plane crashed on Watery Lane in 1942. Now, we're not quite sure, but we think these ones that are a different shape, sorry about the wind, are either Polish or I think maybe Czech or maybe
foreign
Slovakian.
People who served in the British forces, that's what it is, isn't it?
They are definitely foreign.
Yeah, because the names are very foreign, like
Yeah.
Emil Turkel.
Yeah. We've got Vaclav.
Ovsil,
Yeah.
Josef Rala.
Yeah.
You know, and look, there's even like the photograph of this guy here.
Yeah. I say what's making me think Polish or Czech is the crest on the back of them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's Polish or whether it's Czech or maybe Slovakian.
But each one of them, underneath, it tells you that they were a certain denomination within the RAF.
Yeah. It's very
Held
unusual.
a certain position within the RAF. Yeah.
Very unusual to find these, because obviously they're a different shape to what we're used to seeing with Commonwealth War graves, because they're normally this shape. This one on the end is like the odd one out on this row.
Air Force.
Yeah, yeah. Right, let's move on to Main Street. Now for Main Street. This is an old pub which was called the Foresters Arms. The village has no pub these days, nor does it have a shop. What it does have though is a nice mix of property styles. This, for example, is a typically British terraced row, but a lot of Main Street is detached housing. If you know where to look, you can also see some of the village's former amenities. This house used to be the post office, for example. Turning onto Mill Lane, here's where we come across the village's allotments. If you're new here, finding these is a running joke. And also, if you're new, I'll warn you now, TVI isn't all about the good stuff either. Here's the proof, a sewage pumping station. That brings us to the Nottingham to Crewe railway line, the same line which we met back in Hatton, which is a couple of miles to the east. Got to admit, Nicky, on that last shot, you looked like you were waiting for a train. I don't think they stop here in Scropton. Oh. So, unfortunately,
maybe I had to just take up train surfing.
Train surfing?
Yeah, catch a moving train, like something we want. I've not seen train surfing.
I've seen one guy who springs to mind. I can't remember his name though, but
Shay.
Shay. Ah, yeah. Shout out for Shay then. This next section is very much water-based. This is Brook Lane, which runs just to the north of the River Dove, which is somewhere in that direction over there. This runs around the back of the church and alongside the railway line. I would imagine most of this area acts as a floodplain for the Dove. Over to the right there's a small reedy lake, and Foston Brook makes a reappearance here as well, flowing south and draining into the Dove. This was a peaceful little part of the walk, only really punctuated by birdsong, with barely any traffic and lots of gorgeous open countryside. Brook Lane meets the railway line again now at Scropton Crossing, which has a very unusual set of crossing gates, which we'll talk about shortly. And how about this lovely signal box? This was built in 1884 by signalling contractor Mackenzie and Holland, and it's still in use today. So this looks like a hand-operated crossing, I think, because I can't see any electrical gubbins to operate these gates. These are very, very old, and they're anchored in the middle with a block of stone.
And a chain.
And a chain, and that's it. That is it. It's amazing, really, when you think about it. Beautiful signal box as well, and there's no gate either to prevent cars from sort of crossing, if you know what I mean, otherwise than these. That's actually really unique. That's a very strange crossing, but one that
what it is that the road remains open unless there's a train due, and then the little dude in the box comes down and closes the gate.
Yes, because it is a manned signal box, because I could see somebody in it. So yeah, that's a very unique level crossing.
Oh, okay. All right, listen. Oh, no worries. Right, I'm going to go and I'll speak to you later. I don't know.
That building there is an old schoolhouse, which oddly I found nothing about. Even so, it's a cracking building, one of Scropton's finest. Next we pass a sign which directs us towards a food factory. Stick around folks, there's a special section coming on this in a few moments. Just beyond that sign is another Diamond Jubilee bench, which is pretty much identical to the one seen in Foston. Behind it is a small play area. This is the part of Main Street we didn't see earlier by walking through the churchyard. This is Friar's Garage, which is pretty much opposite St Paul's Church. There's also a bus stop here, marked as the Foresters Arms. This appears to be unused these days because Google shows no services that stop here. And up Watery Lane is Scropton Horse Centre, which offers riding for the disabled, in a similar way to the one we saw in North Ferriby. So what about that food factory then? Well, if you drive east from Scropton into Hatton, you'll pass the enormous Avara Foods site. Avara supplies fresh poultry products, handling both chickens and turkeys. In fact, they're the second largest turkey processor in the UK after Bernard Matthews Limited. The Scropton site is just one of their many UK locations. Originally Cranberry Foods, the factory was bought by the Foston Group in 2012. Eventually, this became Avara, and here's how. Foston was established in 1962 by Robin Foston, the richest man within the UK poultry industry. In 2017, Foston announced a joint venture with American company Cargill, another company with experience in poultry. They would name the resulting company Avara Foods, and they employ some 6,000 people nationally. They're quite a big deal. And that's been the parish of Foston and Scropton. Interesting little one.
Very nice, a lovely walk around. It's just a pity that it's a little bit cold and drizzly. We could have done with it being some nice sunshiny weather, but it's not detracted from the beauty of this little place. I've quite enjoyed it. Some of the buildings here are gorgeous,
including Foston Hall.
Yeah, it's beautiful and quiet. In Scropton, it's beautiful and quiet. You know, you can literally hear a pin drop, and then all of a sudden you get a couple of articulated lorries coming through the village. But on the whole, it's beautiful.
It is.
So yeah,
that's Derbyshire though. It is a beautiful place. We've learnt that, you know, from so many episodes in the past in Derbyshire, and we'll see it again in plenty more in the future. This has been the parish of Foston and Scropton, and I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.